The warm, radiant gold of the screen pulsed, not with data, but with a visceral, sickening throb. The whispers began, not from the speakers, but from the very air vibrating around her, coalescing into a desperate, pleading chorus. She knew then it wasn't just patterns she had found, it was a doorway, slowly, irrevocably forcing itself open into her world. Aris, she said, was one of those people who saw patterns where others saw static. Not in a woo-woo, spiritual way, mind you. No, Aris was all crisp lab coats and peer-reviewed journals. She was drawn to the medically documented near-death experiences, the ones with the impossible details. The specific shoe on the ledge outside the operating room window, the exact conversation the surgeon had with the nurse about his terrible golf game in the waiting room down the hall. The kind of data points that made the hospital administrators blink, then quickly change the subject to budget cuts. I heard Aris had started compiling them almost by accident. A quiet side project, just connecting dots. A database, she called it, glowing with warm radiant gold on her screen in the quiet hours. A meticulously organized collection of what she initially thought were just anomalies. But then the anomalies started to sing a specific, unsettling chorus. It wasn't the seeing a light that fascinated her, that was too generic, too easily dismissed as oxygen deprivation or cultural expectation. No, it was the texture of the light, the specific feeling of being utterly, completely unburdened. The kind of relief that made people, after they returned, look at their living relatives with a kind of profound, gentle sorrow that was hard to place. They'd been somewhere undeniably peaceful, and they knew, with absolute certainty, that their loved ones were still stuck here, wrestling with mortgages and petty grievances and the crushing weight of ordinary days. Aris, I guess, felt that gap keenly. She wasn't a hospice worker, not directly, but she collaborated with Dr. Anya Sharma, who ran the local hospice. Anya was sharp, weathered, her eyes holding the knowledge of countless last breaths. Anya didn't talk about angels, she talked about the shift. The moment when the struggle eased, the lines smoothed, the fear evaporated, leaving behind something profoundly still. Anya, Aris said, had once confessed that it was like watching someone step out of a heavy, soaking wet coat, and she, Anya, was left standing in the rain, shivering. That, I think, was the core wound Aris felt. The peace reported by the dying was palpable, vivid, almost tactile in their accounts, yet utterly inaccessible to those left behind. The convergence started subtly. Aris categorized the NDEs not by cultural background, but by sensory input, by the emotional tenor of the return. She had indigenous elders, Buddhist monks, atheistic physicists, Christian homemakers, all reporting details that, when stripped of their cultural trappings, revealed startling commonalities. The same feeling of interconnectedness, the same precise sensation of returning to a body that felt too small, too heavy, too loud. The same inexplicable knowledge of specific events that transpired while they were clinically dead. Then came the child. A 5-year-old, named Leo, who had a terrible allergic reaction to a bee sting, went into anaphylactic shock, and flatlined for almost 3 minutes. When he came back, he didn't talk about angels or Jesus or a paradise. He talked about the big warm quiet. He said he saw the blue blanket his grandma had knitted on his bed, even though it was draped over a chair in the waiting room at the time. He said he heard the nurse telling his dad that it was looking really bad, and he described the blue scrubs the nurse was wearing. Not a celestial blue, Aris noted in her meticulous files, but a standard hospital issue, faded, almost denim blue. He also described the hospital administrator, Dr. Evelyn Reed, walking past the room and muttering about bed availability. A detail no 5-year-old, or unconscious patient, should have known. Leo's account became a central pillar in Aris's research. It lacked the layers of adult interpretation, the pre-existing frameworks. It was raw, immediate, and it matched the patterns she'd been seeing in adults across continents. It was the moment the anomaly became undeniable. Not just for Aris, but for Anya, who saw Leo's peaceful return and the quiet, almost knowing look in his eyes, a look she'd seen too many times in the elderly. The real mistake here is thinking that data, in and of itself, is a shield against what it implies. Aris, bless her methodical heart, thought if she just had enough data, irrefutable data, the implications would become self-evident, undeniable. She didn't account for the human capacity to simply look away from inconvenient truths, especially truths that dismantle tidy categories and established power structures. What strikes me at this point is how much energy people expend maintaining their comfortable ignorance, even when faced with something that could genuinely expand their understanding of existence. It's a kind of inertia, a fear of the unfamiliar. And Aris, with her glowing screens and meticulously coded entries, was about to collide with it head-on. Aris called her findings the convergence hypothesis. She believed she had found the statistical evidence for a non-local consciousness, a pattern of experience independent of brain function. She started presenting her findings, first at smaller conferences, then bigger ones. She spoke with a quiet intensity, her voice low, measured, letting the data speak for itself. The medical community was polite. Some intrigued, some dismissive. The problem, I think, was that she wasn't selling a new drug or a novel surgical technique. She was offering a profound philosophical shift wrapped in dry statistics. And a medical establishment, quite rightly focused on keeping people alive, wasn't sure what to do with the peace of the dead. She had been working with Anya on a joint paper, combining Aris's quantitative analysis with Anya's qualitative observations from the hospice. Anya saw it as a way to legitimize the experiences of her patients, to offer a glimmer of something beyond mere biological cessation. They deserve more than just being statistics, Aris, Anya had said, her voice rough, her hands, I imagine, still smelling faintly of disinfectant and lavender. Anya had a quiet wound about her own mother's death, I think. Not that she ever spoke of it directly, but Aris said Anya would sometimes trace the rim of her coffee cup, her eyes distant, when they discussed the piece reported by the dying. It was a familiar gesture, that quiet ache. One afternoon, Aris finally compiled her magnum opus. The entire database, cross-referenced, analyzed, anonymized. It glowed in a warm radiant gold on her monitor, a testament to years of quiet, obsessive work. She felt, she later told me, a strange mix of triumph and dread. Because she knew, with absolute certainty, that she could not unknow what she had found. And that the world, particularly her professional world, wasn't ready to know it either. She had rehearsed this presentation, this entire argument, for years. Every rebuttal, every potential dismissal. When she finally sent the comprehensive report to the hospital board, she knew she was making a decision that was irreversible. The meeting with Dr. Evelyn Reed, the hospital administrator, wasn't explosive. It was worse. Reed was all polite smiles and sterile blue suits. The kind of quiet professional language that could carve you into pieces without raising her voice. Aris had laid out her findings, presented the graphs, the case studies, Leo's undeniable testimony. Reed had listened, occasionally nodding, her gaze never quite meeting Aris's. The room was cool, filled with the hum of the HVAC system and the faint smell of antiseptic. Aris remembered the way the light, a harsh fluorescent yellow, bounced off the polished, almost celestial blue surface of the boardroom table. Reed finally spoke. Dr. Thorne, this is, certainly comprehensive. Your dedication is evident. She paused, picking up a pen, twirling it. However, the findings, while fascinating, do not align with our current empirical models for patient care or resource allocation. We simply cannot allocate funding for what is essentially a philosophical inquiry into anecdotal experiences. But the data isn't anecdotal, Aris interjected, her voice tight. It's verifiable. Leo described details he couldn't have known. Multiple patients, globally, report the same non-local information. Reed smiled thinly. Correlation is not causation, Dr. Thorne. And non-local information is not a billable diagnosis. Our focus, as a medical institution, must remain on measurable outcomes, on treatments, on procedures that demonstrably improve patient health and extend life. But what if understanding this does improve patient health? Aris countered, leaning forward. What if it changes how we approach end-of-life care? What if it alleviates fear? Reed put the pen down with a soft click. We already have protocols for end-of-life care. And fear, Dr. Thorne, is a natural human emotion. We manage it with pharmacology and psychological support. Most people misunderstand this, but the real pain isn't in being told you're wrong. It's in realizing that the person you're speaking to isn't even operating on the same plane of reality as you are. They're not disagreeing with your facts, they're dismissing the very framework within which your facts exist. It's like trying to explain the vivid colors of a dream to someone who only understands monochrome. You can describe the blues and golds, but they only hear light or dark. This is exactly where everything changes, because Aris realized then that her thoroughness wasn't going to win. Her meticulous research, her years of quiet dedication, was being categorized away, filed under interesting but irrelevant. It must have felt like a punch to the gut, but delivered with such polite, professional distance that there was no appropriate way to react. Aris left that meeting with the exhaustion of being right about something no one with power would act on. It wasn't anger she felt, not exactly. It was a profound, quiet weariness. She'd spent so much of her life accumulating this truth, piece by painstaking piece, only to find the world wasn't built to receive it. She kept researching, of course. It was all she knew how to do. She returned to her office, where the screen still hummed with the warm radiant gold of her data, a silent monument to her isolated understanding. I still don't know if I made the right choice, you know, the narrator said, her voice barely a whisper, pulling me back to her small office. She was talking about Aris, but I felt like she was talking about herself. To keep pushing, to keep compiling. Does it make a difference? Or does it just make you lonely? She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time that night. Maybe you felt this too. That specific, quiet ache of knowing something profound, something true, and realizing you're almost entirely alone in that knowledge. She said Aris had started to see the world differently after that meeting. Every interaction felt filtered, muted. People talked about their worries, their plans, their struggles, and Aris would nod, smile, respond appropriately. But inside, she was always seeing the heavy, wet coat. She saw the peace that lay just beyond, the profound unburdening, and it made the everyday struggles of the living feel both infinitely precious and profoundly absurd. It was a kind of existential vertigo. She felt like she was living in two worlds simultaneously, one vibrant with an unearthly peace, the other muted and endlessly striving. Anya, I heard, had tried to convince Aris to reframe her work, to focus on the psychological benefits of NDE reports, the post-NDE growth, the changes in perspective. Give them something they can fund, Aris, Anya had urged, her eyes reflecting that deep, quiet knowledge of loss. Give them a category they understand, and then, maybe, you can nudge them towards the deeper truth. But Aris couldn't. It felt like a betrayal of the data, a compromise of the very truth she had spent her life uncovering. She wouldn't lie, not even strategically. Not when the truth was so much more vital. The final confrontation, I guess, wasn't a confrontation at all. It was more of a quiet surrender. Aris was asked to move her research lab, to vacate her grant-funded space. The reason cited was reprioritization of research initiatives. Reed's signature, I imagine, was on the memo. Aris packed up her glowing screens, her meticulous files, the printouts of Leo's innocent, terrifyingly accurate account. The paper felt cold in her hands, even though it was summer. The room, once a sanctuary of discovery, was filled with the silence of spaces designed to discourage presence. She ended up taking a teaching position at a small university, continuing her research in her spare time, privately, funded by a few sympathetic patrons. She continued to publish, but in more niche journals, for an audience already attuned to such questions. She knew she had won, in a way. She had proven her point, to herself, to a small circle of like-minded researchers. But she had lost the platform, the institutional weight, the ability to shout her truth from the mountaintops. It was a Pyrrhic victory, she realized. She had been right, but the cost was an irreplaceable sense of belonging, of being understood by the world she had dedicated herself to. One time, she was describing how she felt after everything. The silence of the spaces, she called it. Not just the physical silence of an empty lab, but the internal silence, the echo of unsaid things. She said it was like standing in a vast, empty hall, knowing you hold the key to a door at the far end, but that door leads to a room no one else believes exists. She still had the key, the knowledge, the conviction. But the journey across that hall, alone, felt endless. No, that's not quite right. It wasn't surrender, not completely. It was a redirection. A pivot to a quieter, deeper current. She continued to collect the stories, these fragments of experience, these specific details. She became a repository, a keeper of these quiet, impossible truths. She never stopped believing in the convergence, in the profound implications of what people reported when their lives hung by a thread. She just stopped expecting the world to catch up. I remember her saying, "I'm not going to pretend this resolved cleanly." She said some truths are like that. They don't resolve. They just are. And you learn to live with them, like a faint, persistent hum in the background of everything. The specific exhaustion of being right about something no one with power will act on. It settles deep, like bone ache. She still had the files, I know. Not the paper ones, not the ones that were easily categorized or confiscated. But the ones that existed in her head, the specific texture of the light, the precise feeling of being unburdened, the knowing sorrow of the returned. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Do you think it ever is, to be right, quietly, all by yourself? I picture those glowing screens in her small office, a warm radiant gold against the celestial blue light filtering through the blinds. Not a clinical white, not a sterile gray, but a vibrant, saturated hue, like a digital sunrise in the quiet hours. That gold and blue, I think, became her world. A world where profound truths pulsed with quiet energy, unseen, unheard, by most. She asked if it's ever enough to be right about something so profound, quietly, all by yourself. What do you think about that kind of solitary truth? If you also feel that persistent hum of truths others overlook, and find solace in stories that explore what lies beyond, then perhaps you belong here with us. We're building a space for those quiet, impossible understandings. Do you know someone who's living with that specific exhaustion of being right about something no one with power will act on? Share this with them, maybe it'll feel like a less lonely hall to cross. After hearing her story, do you believe it's truly enough to hold profound truths quietly, all by yourself? Tell me in the comments right now. If the quiet weight of unseen truths, or the knowing sorrow of being right alone, struck a chord with you, let the like button show it. If you're someone who believes there are profound truths pulsing quietly beneath the surface, unseen by most, this channel is where you belong.